Smoke was curling out of Marjorie Holt's garage when the first sheriff cruiser blocked the street. Not grill smoke, electrical, acrid wrong. Deputies rolled yellow tape across the driveway as two state agents dragged a server rack out from solar inverter. She was barefoot, screaming that it was community property, that they were trespassing, that this would all be reversed by morning. No one answered her across the cul-de-sac. I stood on my porch, coffee steady, my lights still on, my system still humming. That's when one of the agents looked at me and said quietly, "Sir, this all started on your connection." Marjorie Holt didn't ask the deputies what they were doing on her property. She told them where they were allowed to stand. "Careful with that cabinet," she snapped, pointing at the inverter like it answered to her. "That equipment regulates shared energy flow. You can't just disconnect it." She said shared the way other people said mine, even with the warrant in his hand. One deputy hesitated. That was her real talent, making authority pause. Marjorie ran Coyote Ridge like a utility company disguised as an HOA. She didn't raise her voice often. She issued instructions, people usually followed them. She finally noticed me watching. Her eyes locked onto mine across the street, sharp and immediate, like she just found the source of a leak. "There he is," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "That homeowner has been interfering with community systems." For weeks, I hadn't said a word. I didn't need to Marjorie smooth her blazer, turned back to the agents, and delivered the line she'd clearly rehearsed. "He's been siphoning power. Tampering with data, we have reports that was the motive right there. Control of the grid, control of the story, control of who got blamed when numbers didn't add up. She believed rules only mattered when they moved in her direction. Everything else was just noise to be overwritten. When the agent asked for her administrative credentials, her jaw tightened for half a second. It was the first crack, and she covered it by smiling. The notice hit my door 2 days later, slapped on crooked like it was meant to irritate. Non-compliant energy enclosure. Immediate correction required. No greeting, no explanation, just a deadline and a fine large enough to get attention. Marjorie didn't knock, she never did. She showed up with a clipboard and 2 board volunteers, who stayed a step behind, her eyes down like witnesses who didn't want to be witnesses. She pointed at the steel housing beside my garage, the battery unit I'd installed when I moved in. "That casing isn't approved," she said. "Visual uniformity matters." "It's not visible from the street," I said. She smiled once. "Thin it is now." That night, my exterior lights flickered for half a second, just enough to notice the next morning. My energy dashboard showed a brief drop in stored power that didn't match my usage. I checked again at noon, another mismatch. Small, precise. Then came the second notice. Unauthorized load variance detected. Detected by who, it didn't say. I started paying attention. The timing was too neat. The drops always happen when the community relay spiked. When everyone else pulled power, my system took the hit first. At the next HOA walkthrough, Marjorie lingered near my driveway longer than necessary, pretending to review landscaping, while her phone stayed open in her hand. She didn't look at me when she said it. Some homeowners forget that shared systems require oversight. That was the word again, shared. And suddenly it didn't sound neighborly at all. The email arrived at 612A, stamped with the HOA seal and marked mandatory compliance. Energy access assessment required? According to Marjorie, the board had voted to temporarily monitor my home's connection to the community relay. A technician would be installing a diagnostics board. Non-invasive, she assured me. To verify load integrity, the language was polished legal, sounding intentionally vague. I didn't reply by noon. A second message followed. Same subject line, sharper tone. Failure to comply could result in restricted access during peak hours. That was the threat, not a fine. Not yet control that evening. I pulled my own data raw telemetry. Not the HOA's summaries. What I saw didn't line up. Power was leaving my system in short. Aggressive bursts too clean to be mechanical. Too consistent to be random. It wasn't a drain. It was routing. Someone wasn't stealing electricity. They were redirecting it. I checked the relay logs next. That's where the pattern snapped into focus. My node was flagged as auxiliary stabilization, a designation I'd never requested and never approved. It meant my battery compensated whenever the grid dipped. Convenient, invisible, profitable. Marjorie showed up the next morning with a man in a polo shirt, carrying a tablet just here to observe, she said, already stepping past the property line. The board needs transparency. I stood in the doorway and didn't move. Transparency goes both ways. I said. She didn't answer. She just made a note on her clipboard and tapped her phone twice, like she was closing a file. That afternoon, the HOA website updated. A new policy appeared, Community Energy Oversight Initiative. No vote, no announcement. Just authority quietly rewritten. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't enforcement. It was infrastructure capture. I stopped looking at summaries and started pulling the raw export files the HOA never thought anyone would ask for. Hour-by-hour load reports. Credit allocation tables, transaction IDs. Buried 3 layers deep behind the glossy community savings dashboard. That's where the lie finally showed itself. My system wasn't just stabilizing the grid, it was propping it up every shortfall. Every surge, every moment, the community exceeded its own capacity. My battery absorbed the hit, and the HOA recorded the excess as collective output. Output they didn't own, they were selling it. Energy credits bundled and transferred under a shell account labeled CR Operations, routed to a regional broker. Not thousands, not tens of thousands. Over the last 18 months, the total cleared just under 7 figures, and the signature approving every transfer. Marjorie Holt. That was the moment the air went out of the room. Not anger, something colder. Because this wasn't sloppy greed or HOA incompetence. It was structured, metered, audited just enough to pass a surface glance. My home was the keystone quietly flagged. Quietly exploited, I sat there longer than I meant to, staring at the screen while the desert heat pressed against the windows. I thought about every notice taped to my door. Every random inspection, every flicker I'd brushed off as coincidence. None of it was personal, I was inventory. Once I saw that everything else snapped into place. The urgency, the intimidation. The fake policies rolled out without votes. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was protecting a revenue stream. I saved everything, hash-verified copies. Read-only archives, a timeline so clean it felt surgical. And then I found the last piece. Several reports submitted to the State Energy Exchange had been altered after the fact, timestamps rewritten, source nodes reassigned. The edits all originated from a single administrative login registered to Marjorie's home address, using credentials created on the same day. She first cited me for non-compliant energy use. That's when fear finally hit. Not for me, but for how far she was willing to go to keep this buried. Because this wasn't an HOA violation anymore. It was felony territory and she had no idea. I'd already crossed the line from homeowner to witness. I didn't call the police, not yet. I called the one office Marjorie couldn't bully with a clipboard, the State Energy Compliance Commission. I framed it carefully, no accusations. Just a request for clarification about reporting, thresholds, and third-party load attribution. They called me back the same afternoon. The engineer on the line didn't sound alarmed at first. Curious, maybe I shared one file, then another. I heard the pause when he opened the raw telemetry, the kind of silence that tells someone just sat up straighter in their chair. That designation shouldn't exist, he said finally. Auxiliary stabilization requires written consent and independent verification. I never gave either, I said. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived at the HOA office, requesting documentation for recent energy credit transfers. Marjorie responded publicly before anyone else could, and all community email, assuring residents that the inquiry was routine and that no action was required. Privately, she panicked. That night, my logs lit up with activity. Attempts to reassign note IDs, backdated edits, a sloppy override that failed halfway through. She was trying to fix the past in real time. It only made things worse. The commission rejected the HOA's filings within 48 hours. An independent auditor flagged inconsistencies. A county inspector requested physical access to the relay cabinets. Suddenly, the language shifted. Words like temporary and clarification disappeared, replaced by discrepancy and unauthorized modification. Marjorie showed up at my driveway the next morning, smiling. "Too fast, you've caused a lot of confusion." She said these systems are complicated. People get nervous. I didn't change anything. I replied I just stopped pretending not to see it. Her smile slipped. "You should be very careful about what you imply." That was the threat quiet measured. That afternoon, the HOA scheduled an emergency meeting, closed session mandatory attendance. No agenda posted, and just before the notice went out, Marjorie sent one last email to the board. "We need to stay unified outside. Scrutiny will only make this worse." She was right about one thing. There was no going back now. I didn't send the files under my name. I stripped the metadata, scrubbed my identifiers, and assembled a clean packet timelines. Ledger transfers, relay designations. Rejected filings, nothing emotional. Nothing speculative, just facts arranged so they couldn't be misunderstood. I sent it to every board member from an anonymized address. and copied the Commission's public intake portal. Subject line: immediate risk. Personal liability exposure. By sundown, the neighborhood went quiet in a way I'd never felt before. No group posts, no comments. No reminders from the HOA, just silence, thick and deliberate. At 8:03 p.m., the emergency meeting notice dropped. Mandatory attendance in person only. Community center 24 hours notice. That was the tell if Marjorie had nothing to hide. She would have waited, scheduled it properly, controlled the room instead. She rushed, trying to collapse the timeline before the audit could. My phone buzzed with private messages. Neighbors asking if I knew what was happening. One board member asking carefully if I'd noticed irregularities. Another simply wrote, "Are we in trouble?" Marjorie didn't contact me directly. She didn't need to. She filed one last violation instead: interference with community energy infrastructure. Immediate sanctions pending. The fine attached was the largest yet, enough to threaten lien proceedings if unpaid. I printed it and slid it into the folder with the rest. An hour later, a new log appeared on my system. An attempt to reroute the relay away from my node. Entirely clumsy, rushed, incomplete. If it had succeeded, the grid would have destabilized during peak draw. She wasn't just covering tracks anymore. She was willing to break the system to save herself. I shut my access down cleanly, isolated my battery, left the rest untouched. Then I packed one document for the meeting. Just one, the first report she ever altered. The one that proved she'd known exactly what she was doing. From the start tomorrow night. She planned to control the room. She had no idea she'd already invited the people who could end it. The community center felt smaller than usual, packed tight with folding chairs and low voices that cut off whenever Marjorie walked past. She stood at the front table, blazer-crisp posture, perfect fingers resting lightly on her binder like it was a shield. She called the meeting to order exactly on time. "This session is to address recent misinformation," she said, eyes already sweeping the room. "Certain homeowners have interfered with our energy systems and caused unnecessary alarm." A few people shifted. No one spoke. Marjorie turned toward me without using my name. "We'll begin with enforcement actions currently under review." That's when the doors at the back opened. Two men stepped inside, state badges clipped to their belts, calm, unhurried. The room changed instantly. Chairs scraped. Someone inhaled sharply. Marjorie faltered just enough for everyone to notice. One of the men spoke voice. "Even this meeting will pause." Marjorie recovered fast. "You don't have jurisdiction here. This is a private HOA matter." The second man held up a folder. "Not anymore." He glanced around the room once, then back at her. "We're here regarding unauthorized energy credit transfers and falsified reporting." Marjorie laughed too loudly. That's absurd, but her hand had tightened around the binder. And for the first time, the room wasn't looking at me. It was watching her. The taller agent didn't argue with her. He set a small projector on the table and turned it on. The screen lit up with a single chart, clean, simple, unmistakable. Energy output versus reported credits. The gap was wide enough to draw murmurs from the room. "This is community production is filed," the agent said, tapping the left column, and this. He tapped the right is what was actually generated. Marjorie leaned forward. "Those figures are preliminary." The agent clicked once, a new screen appeared. Transaction records, dates. Amounts and account name repeated down the page like a drum beat. CR operations, another click. Metadata, edit histories. Timestamps, rewritten hours, sometimes days after submissions. The cursor hovered over one entry edited from an administrative login. "Registered to this address," he said, reading it aloud. Marjorie shook her head fast. "Anyone could have accessed that. Those systems are shared." The agent nodded almost sympathetically and brought up the final file. A device ID, her inverter. Her home. The room went silent. Not shocked, just stunned, like everyone had reached the same conclusion at the same time. Marjorie opened her mouth. No sound came out. Marjorie pushed her chair hard enough that it scraped across the floor. "This is a setup," she said, voice sharp, eyes darting to the board. "You all know how complicated these systems are. Numbers get misread." No one nodded. One board member stared down at the table. Another folded her hands like she was bracing for impact. The agent didn't raise his voice. "Ma'am, we're executing a warrant to seize all HOA managed and personally controlled devices used in energy reporting." "That's outrageous," Marjorie snapped. "You can't just, you've already consented," he said, holding up a signed document as administrator. Her face drained. She looked around the room, searching for someone to interrupt, to object, to rescue her. No one moved. I stood not to speak, just to step aside as two officers approached her table. She clutched the binder to her chest like it could save her. "This isn't over," she said, trying to sound certain. The agent met her eyes. "It is for tonight." They guided her toward the exit, past the rows of homeowners she'd find, warned and silenced. No shouting, no drama. Just the soft sound of footsteps and the door closing behind her. Someone in the back exhaled. Another person started to clap once, then stopped. The room stayed quiet. The system had finally snapped back into place. No one spoke right away. The room felt lighter, like pressure had been let out slowly instead of all at once. Chairs shifted. Someone laughed nervously, then covered their mouth. A few people finally looked at each other instead of the front table. A woman 2 rows ahead turned around and met my eyes. "I thought it was just me," she said quietly. "The notices, the threats." Another voice followed, then another. Short sentences, half confessions. Apologies that didn't try to explain themselves. The board members stayed seated, stunned, like they just realized how far they'd been carried by momentum. Instead of judgment, one of them rubbed her temples. Another kept staring at the empty chair Marjorie had left behind. I felt the tension I'd been carrying finally loosen. Not triumph, not relief exactly. Just the absence of something heavy. For the first time since moving here, I wasn't bracing for the next email, the next knock, the next notice taped to my door. Outside, through the glass door, the desert evening settled into stillness. Inside, the neighborhood exhaled together. The phone buzzed on the table at the front. One of the remaining board members glanced at the screen, swallowed, and put it on speaker without standing. The agent didn't interrupt. "This is counsel for the Conservancy," the voice said, tight and controlled. "Based on what's been presented tonight, all energy credit activity is frozen. Effective immediately. The HOA is suspended from managing or aggregating power assets. Pending review." A murmur rippled through the room. The voice continued. "Restitution exposure is estimated in the low 7 figures. Individual liability will be assessed separately." Someone whispered, 7 figures, like they were testing the weight of it. The agent nodded. "Once criminal charges will be filed. Unauthorized access, fraudulent reporting, financial misrepresentation." No one argued. No one asked questions. The board member ended the call and looked up. "Eyes glassy, effective now," she said, reading from an email that had just arrived. "The Conservancy is barred from reclassifying private energy assets without written homeowner consent, third-party verification, and a recorded community vote." I didn't react. I didn't need to. The rules had finally caught up to reality. And for the first time, the system wasn't pointed at me. Someone at the front asked, "What happened next?" The agent answered by nodding toward the glass doors outside. A technician was already waiting, tablet in hand, ready to rekey the relay access. No speeches, no ceremony. Just a system being corrected in real time. A board member stood and cleared her throat. "All energy assets revert to individual control until further notice." She hesitated, then added effective immediately. I pulled out my phone and watched my dashboard refresh. 1 node, 1 owner. My battery indicator climbed smoothly, steady and unshared, no spikes. No phantom drains around me. People check their own screens. A few quiet nods passed between neighbors. No cheers, just recognition. This was how order was supposed to feel: boring, precise, fair. Through the window, the last of the flashing lights disappeared down the road. The desert settled back into its low, even hush. No sirens, no shouting. Just the faint hum of systems, doing exactly what they were designed to do. I capped my thermos and stood ready to go home. For the first time in months, nothing followed me out in a neighborhood obsessed with control. The real power came back the moment the noise stopped.